The brightness, yeah. Yeah. So we're very fortunate today to have someone with us who really knows so much about A Course in Miracles and has been studying it for a very long time. I've known, like I mentioned the other day, I've known three people in my life who really understood and grasped The Course in Miracles. One was Marianne Williamson, of course. You know Marianne Williamson, who I'm talking about? She really gets The Course in Miracles deeply and can speak about it profoundly. Astronaut Edgar Mitchell, astronaut who went to the moon. He taught Course in Miracles when I was at Unity of the Palm Beaches. And he was a terrific Course in Miracles teacher. He still might be, but he's not at that particular church anymore. Edgar Mitchell was brilliant. I used to love his lessons. And Susan Considine. That last name may ring a bell. My dear friend, a former wife, mother of Tamsin, just a terrific Course in Miracles teacher. We're very blessed to have her back with us today. And let's just welcome Susan.
Did you get creative with those lyrics? Those are all the original ones? Oh. I thought you were getting creative. Well, how many are grateful for that extra hour this morning? How many of you thought, it's about time, I'm still missing that hour from the spring? I know I am very grateful for the extra hour because I'm hoping that it brings a little more coherence to what I'm going to say to you this morning. By the way, do you know what you call a man who's short on time? Tim. Come on, you guys are used to bad jokes here. I don't want to break with tradition. All right. So I'm actually grateful that it's daylight savings because I like this metaphor of an extra hour. That extra hour to give us a gap, right? All of us walk around saying, I don't have enough time. We treat time as a commodity. I'm running out of time. If I had enough time. And we have no excuse because we have an extra hour this morning, that gap. So what can we do with that gap? That gap is so important when we experience spiritual injury. What spiritual injury? I'm taking a little liberty this morning, but spiritual injury, have you felt offended at all in the last week? Rejected? Cheated? Not good enough? Not smart enough? Not thin enough? Any not fill in the blank enough? Any guilt or shame? Anything you're avoiding? Anything you're avoiding? Any resistance to what is, basically, right? That gets us into our ego self. A Course in Miracles talks about our ego self versus a spiritual self, where we're feeling it at one-ment with others. So that ego self is the belief that we are this separate mortal body that is vulnerable, that can be hurt, can be separated, that's jockeying for resources, that is at the mercy of zero-sum games. You win, I lose. I win, you lose. Right? So we seek a gap to get between our ego self and our spiritual self. And that's not always easy to get to. So sometimes we're taking a gap simply to diffuse the ego, and then other times we can actually get onto the next context. We're seeking to create a new context around our experience. I read last week from a couple sections of A Course in Miracles, and briefly on one on perception. And this reading says, perception can make whatever picture the mind desires to see. Remember this, in this lies either heaven or hell as you elect. Perception is a mirror, not a fact, and what I look upon is my state of mind reflected outward. So when we experience this sense of personal injury, I've learned from the spiritual programs I'm in to look at, well, what's the context that I'm holding around this situation? I also mentioned for you artists last week, I brought in my example. You can take the same color and put it on two different colored backgrounds, and you get a different experience of that color. This is the same color on red versus green. One looks more blue, one looks more purple. I always try and keep this metaphor in my mind when I'm experiencing something, not in a way I'd like to experience it. Well, what would happen if I changed the context around that experience? Could I get a different experience of it? Right? So, to get that gap, I shared that reading last week. That reading was a way when we're triggered, when our buttons are pushed, how can we change our state of being? Because, like Stuart Smalley said, it's much easier to put on slippers than to carpet the world, right? If I have to control all of you, what kind of a life am I going to have? What kind of an experience am I going to have in the moment? So, for me, spiritual programs, spiritual exercises, I'm not looking for woo-woo crystals, any of that stuff. I want something in this moment that's going to help me bring serenity, lightheartedness, and connection to others. If I'm not getting that, I don't see the point of it. I always look for practicality. I'm also sharing in these last 2 weeks some of the great wisdom from Alanon, which is based on the 12-step traditions. And it's not just for family and friends of alcoholics, it's for any human being that walks around and sometimes feels at the mercy of other people. So I'm going to share a good reading that comes from one of the daily readers of Alanon. It's called Courage to Change. And this is really about creating that space, that gap, where we can make the shift from our ego self, our self-centered self, our self-important self, to the spiritual self that's not reined in by all these troubles and other people. And for this I need glasses. This is something that's easy to remember, too. That's why I like to share it. It's what we call the 3 A's. In dealing with a change, a problem, or a discovery, awareness is often followed by a period of acceptance before we can take action. This process is sometimes referred to as the 3 A's: awareness, acceptance, and action. Coping with a new awareness can be extremely awkward, and most of us are eager to spare ourselves pain or discomfort. Yet, until we accept the reality with which we have been faced, we probably won't be capable of taking effective action with confidence. Still, we may hesitate to accept an unpleasant reality because we feel that by accepting, we condone something that is intolerable. But this is not the case. As it says so eloquently in One Day at a Time in Alanon, acceptance does not mean submission to a degrading situation. It means accepting the fact of a situation, then deciding what we will do about it. Acceptance can be empowering because it makes choice possible. Today's reminder: I will give myself time to accept my situation before I act. Unforeseen options can become available when I accept what is. This was, the first time I read it, was like a big splash of cold water into my face. Oh yeah, no wonder I've been suffering. I perceive what's happening, and I want to jump to fixing, especially other people, right? That's where I've been in the past. I often never sat with acceptance. And then as I thought about this reading more, I'm always trying to jump over that gap, the acceptance gap, trying to go from awareness to action. I also realized I was really trying to jump over the gap of awareness. I thought what I perceived to be going on was what happened. And now I've pushed myself back even further and said, do I really know what's going on? Before I can even start to accept it, do I really know what's going on? And so again, one of the reasons why I love Course in Miracles, it is one of the simplest spiritual programs I have ever used. It cuts to the chase faster than anything. Sometimes these daily readers, and I'll have these up here if anybody wants to peek at the Alanon daily readers, there's 3 of them. Those are great for me. I can get more present to them. If I'm really yoked into something, Course in Miracles keeps it really simple. Love or fear? Am I coming from love or fear? And am I seeking at-one-ment or am I seeking separation? It's so simple. There's no, well, I'm kind of being loving. There's, well, I'm just a little bit afraid. No, it's one or the other. And what happens when we shift? So, we're often looking for something else to come along. We have this illusion that there's an equation, me plus this unknown X, and I'm going to have serenity. But most spiritual programs teach us this is really myself minus an X, and then I get my serenity. Spirituality is usually a subtraction process. It's taking away resistance. It's taking away our blocks to love. A Course in Miracles says, love doesn't wait on time, it waits on welcome. Our welcome. So, why do we have trouble sitting in that space of, let's say we can get to the awareness. Why is acceptance so difficult? Well, in some cases it's because if we really had to sit there with acceptance, we wouldn't know what to do. That's where I love what the Buddhists teach, and that is the gift of the I don't know mind. That was hard for me because I grew up having to learn quickly how to figure things out. And I got a lot of recognition for figuring things out. So sitting there not knowing was not a comfortable place to be. Now, when we talk about the gift of the don't know mind, we are talking about the gift. We're not talking about the exasperation of the I don't know mind. We're not talking about the resignation of the I don't know mind. I don't know what to do about that person. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about the resentment of the I don't know mind, the worry of the I don't know mind. We're not talking about the threat of the I don't know mind. We're talking about the gift of the I don't know mind. And I did bring this basket along. I couldn't wrap anything. Because I wanted us to actually get in our mind a metaphor of a gift. A gift. I don't know what's in that basket. I don't know what's there. I'm not even maybe close to the basket yet, but I'm going to hold the space that whatever is going to come of this situation is going to be a gift to me. The gift of the I don't know mind. There was a really good Zen master, he still is on YouTube, that I watched. He talked about we have trouble sitting with the I don't know mind because sometimes we think that would be a reflection on us that we're stupid, right? If we don't know. It might mean it's a threat. If we don't figure this out soon, somebody's going to take advantage of me. That may be another reason that we resist it, being vulnerable. Also, this great Zen master was saying we're not comfortable giving up our position. We have a position, and he said, it's okay to have your position, just don't hold on to it. And that was a revelation for me, that I could hold what seems like two incompatible thoughts. I have my position, but I'm open to seeing it differently. So when I heard that, I just imagined a cage with the door open. Okay? Just the door open. I don't have to get out yet, but just start seeing the door open. The door is open. So, again, we want to look at the gift of the I don't know mind. So how do we get to that space? Again, sometimes in a certain situation, we're looking specifically for diffusion. We got triggered, right? I talked about last week, there was a woman in Alanon who shared, this guy just triggers all my buttons. He pushes all my buttons. And the woman's sponsor said, well, what are you doing with all those buttons? How'd you get them in the first place? And now that you know you have them, you're just going to keep walking around and being at the mercy of everybody who might push your buttons. You're going to be detonated right and left. So, again, we're looking for this gap. We're looking to shift our context from my scared little ego mind to divine intelligence, divine mind, where I know I'm not vulnerable. And I need to create a gap, sometimes to diffuse it and then to be able to make that shift. So I used to work in quality management. We always say when something goes wrong, they call it a nonconformance, we have to do two things. We have to take corrective action, which means fixing the problem that just happened, and then you have to take preventive action so it doesn't happen again. So I've been thinking about that with regard to prayer. So in that moment, when we get triggered, there are certain things we can do. I gave you that prayer last week, that reading, and if anybody was not here last week and would like a copy, I have other copies. And that's good to have when you get triggered, but it's something you had to have in your pocket, right? We're not always out there with that when we're getting triggered. So Alanon has some really great slogans, and I'm going to just throw a lot of stuff at you this morning because something might land on one person's ears and not on the others. And if you take one thing away this week that you can use that's going to give you peace of mind or make a relationship more harmonious or make your trigger less explosive, then this is a good thing. So some of the great slogans of Alanon, and we train ourselves to try and remember these in the moment, right? We say, we're not responsible for our first thought, because that might be a trigger, but we are responsible for our second thought. That's, again, we're trying to get some space. We're trying to get that gap between running down a long, dark alley with our trigger to the past to getting back to our spiritual self, which can rise above it. So here's some of the great slogans of Alanon. First things first, how important is it? Keep an open mind. Keep it simple. Let go and let God. Let it begin with me. Me? I got to do it first. Yeah, let it begin with me. Live and let live. That means I live my life. I'm going to let them live their life. I'm going to let their higher power work through them. One day at a time. Think. Think that is often used as an acronym. This is more beforehand. Was it thoughtful? Was what I have to say thoughtful, honest, intelligent, necessary, and kind, right? So those are some of the great slogans. Again, if you could just get one of these working, you got to have something on hand when you get triggered to work in these. A Course in Miracles has some very, very good on-the-spot spiritual lessons to use if you can remember them. One of the best ones for me is in my defenselessness, my safety lies. That has gotten me out of so much agony. That has been a get out of jail free pass for me more than I can remember. That I don't need to respond to this other person. I don't need to defend myself. When I defend myself, Course in Miracles says we get an illusion locked into another illusion. The belief that I'm vulnerable. Again, love waits on welcome, not on time. Course in Miracles also says we're never upset for the reason that we think. I'm never upset. You wanting to step in?
Are you open to questions? Good question.
Yeah.
I love that original quote you gave.
Mm-hmm.
So impactful. I'd love to hear that again. The very first one.
In my defenselessness?
No, way back. You beginning of the talk.
Which one? One about perception?
Perception.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're going to make me put on my glasses again. Just drop my papers. Perception is a mirror, not a fact. And what I look upon is my state of mind reflected outward. Is that it?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Okay. All right. Another, going back to Marianne Williamson, I learned a lot from her. I give her a lot of credit for what I understand, what I've been able to use about this. Taking A Course in Miracles, she said, when I'm struggling with another person, what am I seeing in this person that God would not see? And what would God see in this person that I'm not seeing? That one brings me down fast, gets me in my gap fast. Slows me down. I love that one. Another thing that we might do when we're getting triggered is the prayer for protection. All of you who've been coming here regularly, you know that one. If you don't, I think, is it on your website? Okay. Another thing that I do is, and this really comes from Landmark, is rather than saying, he said such and such, I say, it occurred to me as. I'm shifting from having a position and holding it to just having it but not holding it. I still think this is what happened, but I'm only saying it's occurring to me this way because I've seen it through this filter of this brain that's been around for, I don't want to tell you how many decades now, but which has built up its own triggers, right? And so I'm trying to create a gap so I can get this frame of reference to start shifting a little bit. Another thing I do, I've only learned this in the last 2 years from Alanon, is I want to say I refuse to speculate, but I try and keep myself from speculating on other people's thoughts and intentions, motivations, unless I've heard it directly from them themselves. You know how much I've caught myself saying, well, she thinks da 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 da, and I realize I've never actually heard her say that she thinks that way. I realize how many times I have filled in the script without actually being in communication with that person. So in particular, I lost my mother 2 years ago. And anytime somebody dies, some regrets come up. And our family has sometimes talked about her. And there are times when we want to speculate on what my mother thought about things. And we have no way of verifying it. So why do I want to spend any time in that space, particularly if it causes me distress, causes me some sadness? I can let that go. I can leave that to God. If my mother had anything unresolved, she'll be solving it wherever she's solving it. But I'm not going to speculate on what people think if they have not communicated it to me. So, again, we're still in this list of how to deal with an upset when we're off center in the moment. A couple other things. I'm still in my laundry list. Landmark. If any of you have done the Landmark Forum, they have some really great exercises. One is take your story, because again, we're trying to loosen the context, create a gap. Take your story and tell it 5 different ways. Tell it as if it happened to somebody else. They say, tell it as if it's really sad. Not just the way it's sad, you made it. Make it really sad. Then make it funny. Put a clown in there. Turn it into a comedy. Tell that story 5 different ways. Again, because you're trying to loosen yourself up from it. Keep that gap open. We're trying to maintain openness. Another thing they do is to take an inventory of your bodily sensations. I was struggling with a boss of mine, and there was one day where I'm quitting today. I'm quitting today. I made myself walk down 13 flights of stairs, and I walked around the building, and took an inventory of what were the physical sensations in my body, because my mind was out the window, right? So I noted my stomach is twisted up, my jaw's clenched, I'm only breathing up here, and when I got present to all of my physical sensations, what I was present to was, I'm never going to be good enough here for this boss. And then I could move forward because I realized that was something I was making up. All right. Another thing, watch comedy. When I took my 4-step inventory in Alanon, I watched a lot of comedy before I started doing it so I could stay lighthearted about it. Also, get a sponsor. Get a sponsor. Get somebody who's going to hold the space of wisdom for you. Okay, I'm getting the signals. I have to move on. Lastly, again, so one of the things I shared last week, too, in doing these readings, is we can also take this preventive action. Our spiritual body needs exercise just as much as our physical body. So by praying in advance, using prayer and meditation, getting our conscious contact with God, we're less likely to atrophy our spiritual muscles. We're less likely to be prone to injury when challenging situations come upon us. So, what are the preventive actions? Start taking those inventories. Do daily readings. This is an important one. Practice with less challenging people. There's some people where I wish God would grant me a few exemptions. I'll be great with all of you. Just get me out get me out with these two people. I don't want to have to work it out with them. Practice with less challenging people. You couldn't run a marathon tomorrow. You'd have to start doing a mile at a time, working your way up. Start with the less challenging people. Take an inventory of your friends and your confidants. Are they holding the space of wisdom for you, or are they helping you get caught up in your story? Okay, I'm getting the signal. I'll have to come back and share these other things next time, huh? All right. So you'll have to get them all next time. I do want to share Rodney Dangerfield. You know, I want to tell you, he's one of the greats. I watch him when I'm feeling really miserable about myself. And I just want to tell you, when he got off stage, he had a hard time getting people to relate to him other than the loser that he portrays on stage. That's always stuck with me, that be careful how you're enrolling people with you. All right. So, in closing, give yourself an hour. Give yourself the gap. Give yourself the benefit of the I don't know mind. It's okay not to know. Awareness, acceptance, action. Create the gap and don't try to leap over it. We're putting on slippers. We're not carpeting the world. Are we running out of time? Course in Miracles says love and guilt cannot coexist. So my last thought to leave with you is, a man with one watch knows what time it is. A man with two watches is never sure. John, could you lead us in prayer?
Excellent, Susan. Thank you so much. Awesome. That presence, that divinity within each one of us, that Buddha mind, that Christ mind, that source energy. Let me take what I need to know today. Let me remember what I need to know, and remind me during this week of just that phrase, just that teaching, just that spiritual truth that was presented today, that I need to move forward happily, peacefully, successfully in my life. Take a moment now and remember for yourself the one phrase, the one story, the one example, the one spiritual truth you want to take with you today. Make a list if you have several. What would life be like? What would life be like if you lived that truth today? If you lived that truth this entire week? How much more loving could life be? How much more peaceful could your life be? How much more success could you enjoy? Who knows? That's the I don't know mind, asking the question, I don't know. Let's find out. Let's find out. Thank you, Divine Spirit, Divine Friend, for blessing me today. Remind me all week long of these wonderful principles I wish to take with me and to put into my life. That my life matters and makes a bigger difference in my life, my family's life, and to enrich the world. Thank you. Thank you, God. Amen.